talk on what's next in Iran. Okay, and let's introduce him a little bit, okay? John Craig is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, was confirmed by the Senate on July 31st, 1998 as the U.S. Ambassador to the Sultanate of Oman. His previous assignment was Director of the Office of Arabian Peninsula Affairs in the Bureau of Near East Asian Affairs. Now, I know John is but I also have a pamphlet on him, and I'm going to bring it out and read it now. So, no, I'm not.
Thank you.
No, I'm not. But anyway, he has held assignments in several overseas locations. I won't read them all, and then because I know John's excited to get started. He received his bachelor's degree from the American University. He speaks Arabic, French, and Spanish. So with that, let's let
go.
John take the floor.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Oh, just to let you know that we had planned to do Syria, but that was before the war. So I figured, why do something that's not actually in the headlines or related? So that's why I changed it from Syria to Iran. I'll work with Terry and we'll maybe schedule Syria a little bit later. But the good news is that Syria is actually working and there's no really bad news coming out of Syria. So it's more or less of a success. And thanks, that is a real, how should we say, real success of the current administration working with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And if you ever wonder where this guy came from, the new president of Syria, because he's a little sketchy. Don't look too hard at his assignment, his previous assignments. But the Saudis have him firmly under control. So that's basically one of the reasons why it's doing so well, in addition to the Turks. Okay, so you should somewhere see a yellow tablet. So if you will write down a question about the current situation in Iran, and we'll collect them and put them up here, and we'll take a look at those a little bit later. But now, what's on your mind in terms of Iran? Just write it down, and we'll try and get it. Terry, will you collect them? Will you collect them and just put them up here? By the way, I think the next speaker, we're going to go live on C-SPAN. Look at this rig. I mean, this is better than the college. Yeah.
This needs a pair of earphones.
All right. I'm sure we can take care of that. I want to start out just by showing what a normal decision-making process in the U.S. government looks like. There are a series of prescribed steps that were introduced into the executive branch of the government in 1947. It's called the National Security Act of 1947. And it prescribes the way in which decisions are made for that involve national security And it has been applied on the domestic side. So basically, the US government makes decisions about policy in the same way for foreign policy, national security policy, and domestic policy. And this involves a series of groups that have ascending responsibilities or ascending levels of responsibilities. So you start out with something that's called the Interagency Working Group. That's the basic policy-making group. And it's populated by political appointees. So this whole process is populated by political appointees because the idea is that the president's policy, the president's ideology, the president's goals and objectives are protected by having the people who make policy be part of his ideological administration, if you will. The next level is called that level is assistant secretaries. So, and assistant secretaries are basically the lowest level of Senate confirmed officials, meaning that the president has nominated them, the Senate has agreed that they are fit to serve. The next level is called the Deputies Committee. The Deputies Committee is really a powerhouse. These are the deputy secretaries of all the cabinet secretaries, and they have a lot of power. There's a lot of decisions that they can make, whether it's on domestic policy or national security policy, that they can make without going to the next level. The next level, of course, is the secretaries, so the cabinet members responsible for various issues. And that's called the Principals Committee. And normally, the Principals Committee tackles really hard issues, but not war. So the recognition of China, for instance, would come up to the secretaries of the Principals Committee. Then you have what you call the National Security Council. Now, this sometimes gets confused with the staff of the National Security Council, and I served on the staff of the National Security Council in the year after September 11th, 2001. And the National Security Council is the same as the Principals Committee, but the president is in the chair. So this is the highest level of decision-making in the whole government. And it usually meets maybe 4 times a year and tackles, what's considered to be really important issues. And there's a National Security Council staff for foreign affairs, basically, and there's a domestic affairs council staff for domestic policy. So whether it's Social Security or recognition of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that's the process. Those are the steps. That's how the levels take responsibility for the decisions. And again, they're all part of the president's administration. They're part of the president's ideological policy, and their job is to assure that the president's policies, the president's directives, the president's ideology gets put into practice. So, and it's been that way since 1947. However, not every president has implemented it in the same way. So you have really very different methods or very different practices of making that system work, going all the way back to Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson. Johnson was a dictator, actually. He kind of ignored the whole process. You have Nixon, and then Jimmy Carter and Reagan. They all had a different approach, And one of the most important persons in their executive office of the president is the chief of staff. So the chief of staff is really responsible for, the day-to-day operation of the executive office of the president. So that person has to know everything, domestic and national security, because they're often the last person to talk to the president on any given day. So the fact that this administration, then we come down to this administration. This administration, in the first administration of President Trump, was completely disorganized. There was absolutely no organization. Nobody paid any attention to the steps that they should have followed. Then you had the Biden administration, which I probably irreverently refer to as the one brain administration, because nobody had any say in decision making except President Biden. And now we're back to that in this administration, because this is, not only is this a one brain administration, it's a one brain war. And I'll tell you a little bit about that when we go through. Okay, so here is the logical flow of how policy is formulated. So, and this is actually a framework which Richard Nixon brought to his presidency. It doesn't sound radical, but at the time it was very radical, because we were still under control of the Cold War and Vietnam was going on, and so people weren't thinking clearly about these issues. Nixon said, hold it, don't tell me, why we've done it for the last 50 years. I want you to answer these questions. So here it is, define US interests. And of course, that in the foreign policy context or in security, national security context, means country by country, and then region by region, and then subject by subject, law of the sea, the question of refugees. So what are our interests? And then what's out there, what threats are out there that would prevent us from protecting our interests or achieving our interests? And then actions to be taken, define the actions to be taken so that we defeat any threats to our interests and we can achieve our goals. And so this is the general framework that diplomats think in. Every embassy in the world, for instance, prepares a paper every year, basically conforming to these questions, and then participates in the policy process back in Washington. A new administration, when it comes in, they go through a review of our relations with every single country in this defined way. Now, I don't know if I'm actually accurate in this, but I'm willing to bet that this administration did not do that when they took over in January of 2025. So it's the system is designed to be rational. It's populated by people. People have human traits, and so you're bound to get political decisions. I mean, I've listened to people make, some of these groups make decisions, and sometimes they make a decision based on domestic political issues rather than defining our goals and objectives. So it's, when you hear someone who knows about the situation and they see a decision that's been taken and you hear them say, they did what? You know that they got way off the track in terms of actually trying to define goals and interests and goals. My kind of rule of thumb is that the more important the decision, the higher the level. So it goes from the Deputies Committee, maybe the Principals Committee, maybe even goes to the National Security Council with the President and the Chair. But the people who know the least about the situation are the ones who end up making the decision. So that's just, how it happens. Washington is a big place, so much going on. You have to keep people's attention span. So it's not, it's the framework is there, but it doesn't always work effectively. Maybe that's the most diplomatic way to put it. Okay. Oh, yeah. Hey. Good. Am I not going forward?
You went backwards.
Okay. All right. So I just want to remind you where the Middle East is and to take a look at Iran there on the right-hand side. Just a couple of things about Iran. Iran is, the country of Iran, the size is UK, France, Germany, and Italy combined. So it's a big place. It is really divided almost 1/3, 2/3. The western part of it is cultivated and green, it has rain, and the eastern 2/3 are impossible mountains and desert. And you may have seen some of that when the pilot got rescued. You saw how that, it looked like they were on the moon. But that is the dividing line between the Shia Persian population and the rest of the population. Now, the 93 million people that make up the population of Iran, only 50% of them are Persians. And they all live in the western part. And if you look at the maps that show the bombing targets, you'll see that they're all in the western part of Iran. That's because there aren't very many targets, some down in the strait, down by the strait. But Iran is a serious multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural country. And the Persians are not necessarily in control or very popular with the rest of the population. So you have in that population down by the Strait of Hormuz, you have Arabs who are not even Shias. Oops. What did I do?
You press the forward button to go forward.
Yeah. It just went off.
We're showing up there.
Oh, okay. Somehow this went into sleep mode. Okay. Let's see. So, it's a terribly complicated domestic situation, and it has been that way for a long time. In fact, the Persian Empire goes back quite a ways, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But it's not it's not an easy place to understand, and there are lots of forces involved in Iranian politics. So let's take a look at presidents that have had to deal with Iran, seriously deal with Iran. Jimmy Carter, of course, was president at the time of the revolution, of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Ronald Reagan did the famous, remember the Ali North guns for money deal, where the Congress refused to provide the administration with money to arm the Contras in Nicaragua. And so Ali North got his hands, I still don't know, I'm sure somebody has figured this out, but he got his hands on some arms. He contacted the Iranians and said, you want to buy these arms? And the Iranians said yes. So this is 1986. He took the arms to Iran. They paid him, and he brought that money back and used it to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. So that was just totally out of control. George H.W. Bush, his involvement was kind of peripheral because he was president, remember, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and he managed the liberation of Kuwait. George W. Bush, 43, down in the right-hand corner, he is credited with the fact that the Iranians got nuclear technology. So our relationship with Iran is obviously quite complicated, but most people believe he was asleep at the switch, and that's how the Pakistani, because the Pakistanis already had nuclear weapons technology. You know, there's a difference between nuclear technology and weaponizing nuclear technology. So 1957, in order to prevent the development of nuclear weapons technology, we set up a system called Atoms for Peace. And we went out to countries, and I guess we asked them if they're interested in having nuclear power, and we gave them nuclear technology to develop a power industry. Iran was one of those countries in 1957, and they had nuclear technology from 1957, the Shah, and then, of course, it was there when the revolution took place. Then it's the next step, of course, is to weaponize that technology and to create some sort of explosive device. And that requires the development or the transfer of uranium from grade high enough to create electricity to grade high enough to create a massive explosion. So the progression in Iran's case after the revolution, 1993, so that's Clinton, kind of, the Russians signed an agreement, or the Russians signed an agreement, and that kind of boosted the capability of the Iranians to increase the effectiveness of the uranium. And so here's why George Bush is given the responsibility for the Iranians starting their weapons program. The Iranians signed, as a result of the Russian agreement, the Iranians signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So Non-Proliferation Treaty goes back to the 50s when we were demanding that states not develop weapons technology. And the Iranians signed an NPT, and that set up some requirements, inspection requirements, and it was discovered about 2003 that the Iranians were lying to the United Nations inspectors and that they were seriously enriching uranium, of course, under the noses of the Russians. And so the United Nations at that time imposed sanctions on Iran. Now, those sanctions were pretty substantial, and they were there from 2003 on to 2011, which is when President Obama took over. President Obama had one of his goals, his pre-election goals, was to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons technology. And he started negotiating with the Iranians in 2011. It took, 5 years? Yeah. But what you need to know about that is that it was the Iranians in 2011 that begged President Obama to get an agreement because they were seriously injured by these sanctions. So we kind of don't remember that Iran was in, or Iran thought it was in a real serious situation, and they were. Those UN sanctions were really biting. And that's why the negotiations started. President Obama negotiated what he thought, was the adequate kind of controls that would prevent Iran from weaponizing nuclear technology. Now, nobody, these words are really important because, nobody said Iran had to give up electricity generating. As a matter of fact, they built a whole reactor down in Bushehr, which is very close to the strait, a nuclear reactor that provides electricity to the whole area. So it was always focused on the Obama negotiation was focused specifically on weaponizing the nuclear technology. And if you kind of compare what's called the JCPOA, and believe me, it took me about a year to figure out how to say the JCPOA, and it is a series of confidence-building measures that leads to the inability of Iran to develop nuclear technology into weapons, but only for a certain period of time, and that certain period of time is like 10 years. So you remember the huge outcry that took place at the time the JCPOA was signed. Israel, totally rejected it. The Congress the Senate totally rejected it. And yet, if you look at what's happening now, it's pretty close to what we probably are negotiating now with the Iranians. But anyway, the history of that JCPOA is really interesting. It went into force in late 2015. And the first moves were taken in 2016. Now, what was happening in 2016? We are turning ourselves upside down with an election. The first move, the first, the first confidence-building measure was that the Iranians had to get rid of all of the enriched uranium that was above the grade to produce electricity. And so the Russians and the Iranians took care of that. The Iranians transferred all of that enriched uranium to Russia, which didn't go very far. Russia's pretty close. So they complied with the first part of it. Second confidence building measure belonged to the consortium, but really to the United States, was the release of Iranian funds. Now, you remember the huge situation where the Republicans accused Obama of sending cash to Iran. I think it was like $1.5 billion. It belonged to Iran's previous government, so technically, I guess it was still Iran's money. But that was part of the JCPOA. It wasn't it wasn't outside of the JCPOA. It wasn't an extraordinary situation. Okay, so we did that. And I mean, I guess it was kind of weird maybe that we transferred in cash, but that's what the Iranians said they wanted. So yeah, we sent airplanes full of cash, $1.5 billion to Iran. The next step was for the USA. And the next step was for the United States to relieve Iran of sanctions on banking transactions. Now this was very high on the Iranian list of priorities. We would not allow any American banks, of course, to participate in any kind of transaction with Iranian banks. And we had what were called secondary and tertiary sanctions, so that nobody else, we went after British banks that tried to do business with Iranian banks, German banks. We really had them tied up. And they believed at the time that relieving the economy of the burden of those sanctions would help them, would relieve their economic distress. President Obama balked, but this is kind of completely overshadowed by the election. He balked in June of 2016. He refused to lift the banking sanctions. And the Iranians immediately charged us with breaking the agreement, and we did. We did break the agreement. They're right. And so that's the way we went into the Trump administration. When Trump, withdrew, it's a question. I think you could debate the semantics. It's just a question of, what you mean by withdrawn, because there wasn't any agreement anyway. The agreement had been destroyed by the American side. And so that leads us to President Trump. President Biden, things were pretty, how shall I say, things were pretty inactive during President Biden's administration. President Biden believed, and he applied this in Ukraine, but he believed that the devil you know is better than the devil that might come later. And so he wasn't willing to confront Putin and on Ukraine, because he was afraid of who would take over after Putin. I mean, that's a huge debate that we could have among ourselves, but he applied that principle to Iran. So he didn't actually clash with the Iranians during his administration. And then President Trump comes back in, and Iran bubbling along, of course. The Iranians are, they do all kinds of things that, kind of under the table. Well, so in addition to the nuclear aspect, which the Iranians always, crow that they complied with all the provisions of the JCPOA, but at the same time, they had 5 proxies that were causing trouble in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Yemen. And so there were always something that was going on in terms of our interests, actually. And they were also under sanctions. When President Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, he put more sanctions. So they were still suffering from the sanctions that never got lifted as the result of the JCPOA, which came from 2003. And then we dumped even more sanctions on them. And so their economic situation has just been getting worse and worse and worse. And what happened in January, the people, just kind of had it. And they demonstrated, and that's when the IRGC killed so many thousands of them. But let's get there another way. Okay, so Iran is an ancient culture, and I think that's one thing we forget, that Iran they claim their culture started in 2500 BC. So, and there's evidence that they were kind of early competitors with the Egyptians, with the ancient Egyptians. But the place that Iran has been is basically the same place. A few adjustments seen with the red bars there at certain times when the Persian Empire took land away from neighboring states. This is the last emperor of the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire lasted all the way down to 1923. It was only disbanded at the time of the First World War. And this is the last dynasty in Iran was called the Qajar dynasty. Now, the Qajar dynasty ruled Iran for approximately 150 years. And it was what we might call today an enlightened empire. They had all kinds of universities, and they had ties with Western Europe. They didn't require their women to cover their faces, mainly because of the influence of Western Europe. At the end of the 19th century, the Persians, now don't forget, I'm really only talking about the Persian culture. The Persians put pressure on the Qajar sultans to implement a parliament to give the people a vote, and this is it's pretty rare, right? At the end of the 19th century, and the Qajar emperors agreed. But one of the reasons why this took place, because the British had discovered oil in Iran. And the British saw, as a result of saw the war-making importance, actually, of crude petroleum in terms of gasoline and lubricants. And so the British tried very hard to force the Iranian, the Persian emperors to allow the UK or allow the British Empire to control the development of the oil fields in Iran. Now, from the end of the 19th century all the way up to 1953, this was the major issue between Iran and the West. Russia at certain times tried to help the Iranians. It became such an issue that in 1925, the Shah's father, so the Shah's father is Reza Pahlavi. He was a military general. He said, enough. He took over. He staged a coup, managed to define himself as part of the lineage of the Persian Empire. And they fought. So they fought with the British all the way through 1953. The Shah was not a particularly strong figure. His father abdicated to him in 1941, and he gradually, I won't say capitulated, but he gave in to the parliament. The parliament was very anti-British. And in 1953, the parliament elected this guy, Mossadegh, as the prime minister. Now, Mossadegh, the first thing Mossadegh did was he nationalized all of the oil production. And this, of course, drove the British crazy. And so they immediately branded him as a communist. I mean, think of what 1953 was like. All you had to do was walk down the street and say, there's a communist, and somebody would probably arrest her. So the situation was really out of balance. And the British convinced the United States that he was a communist. And so we joined forces with the British and forced the Shah to expel him, to throw him out. And the Shah came back as a more powerful figure after Mossadegh was thrown out. Funny thing, Mossadegh was the nephew, bloodline of the last Qajar emperor. So it is a complicated story. Now, I'm just showing you this to show you what kind of relations we've had with Iran since the end of since into the 19th century. Look at it. This is a listing of American ambassadors to Iran going all the way back to the 1830s. Now, we don't really think that, our diplomatic relations were very wide in the 19th century, but yeah, Iran had the same representation that the Ottoman Empire had, and some pretty powerful and connected political people. So, by the way, the only president from Pennsylvania is James Buchanan. He was the ambassador to Russia and the UK before he was president. In the 1840s and up to the beginning of the 1850s. He was also the Secretary of State before he was president. I mean, he was probably one of the most qualified people in the whole history of presidents to occupy the position. Okay, so we talked about Mossadegh. There's the young Shah. Now, this is just the progression of rulers from 1953 to 1979. So you had the Shah, and then he had, I think, the Empress was his third wife. He had a mother who was very domineering, and she was one of the problems with his two previous wives. His wife was the sister, his first wife was the sister of the king of Egypt, and the second wife was an Iranian, and then Faradiba became the third wife. And she just terrific person. She really kind of held the place together because he wasn't, just wasn't that strong a personality. He implemented a lot of, reforms that were opposed by most of the religious establishment. And then they, of course, the Shah ruled until our friend, Mr. Khomeini, took over in 1979. Now, the revolution, we could talk, hours about the Iranian Revolution, 1979. The rumbling started, of course, 1978, and to show you how important Iran was to the United States, strategically to the United States. President and Mrs. Carter, and I'm just going to see if I have a picture of them, because I put this together. I guess I don't have a picture of them. Maybe we'll encounter it later. President and Mrs. Carter spent New Year's Eve, 1977, in Tehran. Now, when was the last time you can remember a president of the United States being out of the country even on New Year's Eve? But there was concern then that the Shah was not strong enough, that there were rumblings about revolution in Iran. So Jimmy Carter himself went out there to see, kind of see whether there's anything we should do. Carter is generally accused of being the reason why the revolution took place. That's not true, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. The guy, the mullah there, Khomeini, long history of opposition to the Shah. And he was exiled to France and spent a number of years in France, 10, maybe 20 years in France in exile. When the people started revolting, and it was a people's revolution, stolen by the religious establishment with the help of the French. So there's a wonderful picture, I don't know, maybe I have it, we'll see when we get down there, about Khomeini's arrival back in Iran after the Shah left. And he's being helped down the stairs by the pilot of the Air France airliner that brought him back to Iran. The real story of the collapse of the Shah and the success of the revolution also deals with the French. The Shah was diagnosed with cancer. I'm sure people know what it is, but anyway, it was a cancer that it was a diagnosis a year before, so he had cancer when President Carter was there in New Year's Eve, 1977. The French, think about what 1977 was like. Did we know a lot about curing cancer back then? I don't know. I don't think we probably did. And certainly the French, I wouldn't think. The French misdiagnosed the cancer and they botched the treatment. And so by September of 1978, the Shah was basically incapacitated. And there's an interview that I did with Iran Today TV. I went on a secret mission at Thanksgiving 1978 with Senator Robert Byrd. President Carter asked Senator Robert Byrd to go to Iran on a secret mission, meet with the Shah, and come back and tell him whether the Shah could hold on. Because, look, Iran was at the center of all Cold War activities. Our spy planes, our listening posts, everything was run out of Iran. Think of the numbers of people you probably know who worked in Iran before the revolution. We sold them every piece of military equipment that they had came from the United States. So the result of that trip was, and it was kind of amazing because amazing to me, because the senator, I was with the senator, his wife, his aide, and his secretary, and me. We were the only 5 people on this trip, and I was a low-level person. I was supposed to make sure that we got from point A to point B. But the senator had this very interesting habit of introducing the people that were with him to the heads of state that he visited. It didn't have anything to do with Iran. That's just kind of what he did. So I actually got to shake the Shah's hand the week after Thanksgiving in 1978. The guy was totally gone. Incommunicative, completely missing. I mean, he put up his hand, but he didn't shake it. I had to grab it and shake it like the others did. So don't blame Jimmy Carter. The Shah had never had a chance to recover, to deal with the situation. And of course, the way certain elements of the US government wanted him to deal with the situation was to shoot. Kill the demonstrators, drive them back, which is kind of what the IRGC did in January. And so the whole history then of the Iranian Revolution, they took our hostages, remember, in November of 1979. But you know what else happened in 1979? The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And so think of the situation of America's attention. I mean, talk about, policy formulation. Think of all the effort we put into trying to figure out how to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan in connection with the Saudis. And so while we might think that the Iranian Revolution was kind of top of mind in Washington, it probably wasn't exactly. And so the situation kind of bubbled along. I mentioned to you that in 1957 and the end of the Eisenhower second administration, we provided them with nuclear technology. The Russians and their nuclear agreement in 1992. So this is, kind of going back to the sanctions regime that went into effect from the United Nations. And George W. Bush and his inattention to the acquisition of nuclear technology by the Iranians and developing it in secret. Remember the JCPOA? And then May 8th, 2018. So in June 2025, if you remember, the United States and Israel bombed key parts of the Iranian nuclear facilities or nuclear complexes. They did this, and this was kind of the start of unusual influence. I won't go any farther, but unusual influence on the part of the Prime Minister of Israel on the President of the United States. Now, the reason for that bombing in June of last year was the proposition brought to our president by the Prime Minister of Israel that Iran was within a very short period of time of having enough enriched uranium to be able to create a bomb. And we participated in that. Now, Khomeini, the original ruler, died in 1988 or 89. So he was only in power for 10 years. And then this guy took over. This is the Ayatollah Ali, just to make it difficult, Khomeini. Now, my ear doesn't necessarily pick that difference up, but anyway. And they kind of look alike because they dressed alike. But so he was the steward of Iran all the way since 1989. And he's had, he had a huge influence. And he also has a huge history of anti-Shah activity, anti-West activity. Now, just as a parenthetical, when you say anti-West activity, what it really means is that they believe that Western society has poisoned Islamic society. So there's no, it's kind of a free-floating proposition that anything Western has to be destroyed. And that was the principle that Osama bin Laden used when he attacked the New York City and the Pentagon. But it doesn't lead to an easy resolution, right? I mean, Western society is going to be Western society, and Islamic society or Arab society is going to constantly accept things out of Western society. So you have, 1,000 years of opposition to the poisoning of your society by Western culture. It's something we don't, we think that stamping out the terrorists, finding the terrorists and killing them who perpetrate acts of terror, whether it's here or in Europe, somehow there's an end to that. There isn't an end to that because of this concept of the West. So that 12-day bombing, I don't know. I never saw any real damage assessment. And by the way, the information about this, you can drive yourself crazy because there are so many people doing podcasts and webinars, and YouTubes. I mean, there are probably 50 YouTubes about what's happened in the last 24 hours. So I'm not sure who did the damage assessment, but after it was all over, it was decided that it wasn't enough. And so the events of January after the June bombing, the people went into the street, of course, right? People said enough is enough, and that's when the IRGC mowed them down. Now, that led to the Israeli intelligence information about where the leadership was meeting. That was the key for February 28th. They had information about where the leadership was meeting, and we were able to corroborate that information. And so the bomb went right to the bullseye. There's a big difference, though, between Israeli intelligence on Iran and American intelligence on Iran. Israeli intelligence on Iran is based on human sources, so they've absolutely flooded the place. Obviously, I mean, I don't know exactly, but they have human sources all over that country who are providing them with pretty accurate information against the regime. We have almost no human sources in Iran, but we have electronic sources, satellites, what have you. So I don't know what the difference is, but I made a mistake, sir. Wait, let me see if I can just get rid of it. No. It went blank and I hit it and okay. So I'm going to play an interview that took place yesterday on one of these podcasts, which explains really perfectly what is the current situation in Iran, inside Iran, because I think that's something that we're missing is the actual context of what's happening in Iran. The person being interviewed is a guy named Vali Nasser, and he is an Iranian who came to the United States.
What's the relationship now between the people of Iran, who feel, as I think you've correctly characterized, and the government? How would you characterize the government's, how their conduct is impacted by the people of the country?
I mean, in many ways, we arrived at this war right after
So this is Vali
massive
Nasser.
uprising in
He
Iran
served
that was
as
suppressed quite brutally.
as an advisor in the
most
Obama
important,
administration when they were
thing
negotiating
about
with
Iran was the political
JCPOA.
division, the division in the politics of the country between the people and the ruling regime, that the regime was isolated, that had lost its legitimacy, that was now governing only by brute force and violence. And perhaps President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calculated that if they attacked the Islamic Republic at this time, it would quickly collapse, partly because its base had been very narrowed, and then also that the population may rise up in rebellion. And that didn't happen. And I think that was based on a false assumption that Iranians would rebel in the middle of a war in support of an invading force, when bombs are falling over their heads and they have to worry about their own security, and there's no possibility of actually organizing in a proper way to wage a political battle. And then also because it became very clear to the Iranians that the war was not a clean act of liberation on the part of US and Israel, that increasingly they were the subject of the bombs, that their neighborhoods, universities, hospitals, health institutes were being targeted. President Trump threatened that he would arm separatists in Iran to break up the country. Then he said he's going to send Iran back to the Stone Age, and he was going to, that Iranian civilization was about to die. And so more and more Iranians began to see the war actually as being waged against their country, not against their government. And the priority became surviving the war rather than waging a political campaign against the government. So perhaps politics will return to Iran once the gods fall silent, once you return to some kind of at least a security normalcy. But I think the assumption on the part of Tel Aviv and Washington that the war itself would sort of recruit the Iranian public as an ally in waging a war against the Islamic Republic was based on false assumptions.
So much you said I want to break down. Let's start with this. To be fair, I think the president said in announcing the initiation of the conflict that the Iranian people should wait until the war ended before they rose up. That he didn't want them to do it, or didn't think they should do it during the war itself. And although we're in a ceasefire, it's a tenuous ceasefire. So isn't it possible that if the president does have a plan, it hasn't been, that phase of it has not been initiated yet?
Well, I mean, we really don't know what his plans were, because in fact, he didn't even explain to the American public what the objectives of the war was and why was he waging it and why was it necessary to do it in February. One could argue that if he actually had left the Islamic Republic alone after that massive uprising in January, it was much more likely to fall than actually waging war against it did. After the war, he came up with all kinds of reasons why the war was being waged, including, this was payback for 47 years of Iranian behavior towards the U.S. It was for the nuclear program. It was to liberate Iranians. But it wasn't just a single sentence. First of all, he contradicted himself quite a bit. During the uprising, he said he was going to invade Iran, that the United States was locked and loaded to support the Iranian people to take over their government. And then there was enormous amount of material that was put out by exile television stations, social media campaigns, much of which was actually backed by the United States and Israel as well, which gave the Iranians an impression that this was an easy, quick, surgical war against the Islamic Republic, after which all the instruments of repression in Iran would be gone, and the Iranians would be in a position to take their government back. And I still don't know what President Trump really thinks about this. At times he says, no, I just want a Venezuela scenario in which a different face of the Islamic Republic would come to the fore and would take over. At another time, it sounds like he wants the Islamic Republic as a whole to be gone. But the messaging that was coming to the Iranian public from Israel and the U.S. very clearly gave at least a segment of them a sense that this war was going to build upon the uprising of January in order to bring about a completely new order in Iran. And 40 days in, that hasn't happened. We've ended up in a situation that on the one hand, the President Trump is threatening a massive war on the state itself, on society, power stations, annihilation, etc. And on the other hand, he's going to Islamabad to actually sign a deal which would be with this exact regime that's in power. He's trying to sort of put the best face on it by saying, oh, somehow I brought about regime change in Iran. And the guys who are in power are actually much more pragmatic and better than the ones that were killed at the early start of the war. And that's not believable to the Iranian public because they know the people who are in charge, and they know that the people who are in charge are far more hawkish than the ones that actually were killed.
Okay, again, want to drill down on so many things. Let's start here. You've several times characterized how the Iranian people feel, particularly about the feeling that the war is targeting them as opposed to the government. And I'm not challenging that as being accurate. I'm asking this. How do you know? How are you able to have a sense of what public opinion is in Iran now?
We don't have you're absolutely correct. We don't know 100% what the sense is. But, periodically you get to talk to people if they have Starlink or they have managed to come out of Iran. And you also gauge, the public debate that's happening, and it's available on YouTube, on media, etc. The same kinds of voices that 4 months ago were talking about, absolutely imminent collapse of the Islamic Republic, that there's no way in which they would have anything to do with it, are singing a very different tune. Not that they like the Islamic Republic, but right now the priority of changing the regime has become complicated with priority of survival. That there's a lot more concern about where are we going to end up after this war, what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our universities, and so as a political campaign goes, if the removal of the Islamic Republic was a political campaign for a lot of Iranians, it's become much more confounded and complicated. There's not a single issue campaign anymore. That these guys need to go. These guys need to go has become now complicated with other sets of things, like what's going to happen to the country. At what price should these guys go? Am I willing to pay the entire price? And so the ranks of people who were in January all together against the Islamic Republic has been divided along these kinds of priorities. And this picture, Mark, may change very quickly once the war is done. I mean, let's not forget the massive uprising of January happened 6 months after the June war, during which Prime Minister Netanyahu invited the Iranian public to take over their government. They didn't then. They did 6 months after the guns fell silent. So 3 months from now, 2 months from now, once the war is done, we don't know. And I don't think that the Islamic Republic is in any means clear with its population in terms of what happened in January, the massacre, the economic problems, political problems that have been alienating a lot of Iranians and demanding a change in the regime.
I want, again, a question, a premise.
So I hope that gives you a really good idea of what's actually happening inside Iran while we are watching it from here. And, our kind of focus is the war going to continue or not continue? But we don't know what the reaction is going to be. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. So you can find that if anybody wants to know where you can find that. It's a little bit longer, and there are a couple of other people that were interviewed. But this guy, I think, is really sharp, really right on the mark. So I'm going to take a look at, there are two other issues which are really, they're big issues in terms of what happens in Iran. One is the development of missiles. So they have missiles, they have not, nobody thinks that they have actually weaponized nuclear technology. But if they were to weaponize nuclear technology, they would have to miniaturize it in order to put it on a missile. So that's another, the whole subject of missile development is really a big one. And the next, kind of issue is their support for these proxies around the Arab world. But I don't think we need to go into that right now. So let me just take a look at some of these questions for a few minutes. Stability in the Middle East. Not for a long time. There's so much myth around the whole issue of oil and hydrocarbons coming out of the Persian Gulf. We have not, in the United States, imported any kind of hydrocarbon from the Persian Gulf since 1985. So, you can prove that by going and looking at our import and export statistics. And so, of course, we turned the whole situation around. We were importing a lot of oil, and we were not independent on foreign oil, but we got it from Nigeria and Venezuela and Mexico and Canada. The situation turned completely around when fracking came into the technical lexicon, and now we're exporting not only crude oil, we're exporting gas. We're actually exporting gas to the EU countries, Germany especially, in order to relieve them of the responsibility to get gas from Russia. So the whole energy situation, worldwide energy situation, is just completely turned upside down. The interesting thing is that most of the hydrocarbons from the Persian Gulf go to Asia. So China, Japan, Korea, they're highly dependent on hydrocarbons coming out of the Persian Gulf, both crude oil and gas, but also refined products. Kuwait, for instance, used to send its crude oil, all the way to Belgium to be refined in its own refineries there, Kuwait's own refineries there, and then shipped back as product to Korea. How crazy is that? Think of how much time that stuff spends on the water. So now Kuwaitis got smart in the last 10 years, and they built their own refineries. So now they're shipping product out of the Persian Gulf. Well, that's even more important to the stability of Korea because it's now their principal source of airline fuels, gasoline for their cars. If you haven't, I guess, really studied the hydrocarbon situation in the world since, let's say, since maybe 2010, 2011, you don't know what's happening. It's changed quite substantially. This is what political markers do we need to see in order to study or predict where the situation is going. See, this, I think this is the problem. We don't have political markers. The Europeans don't want to get into it with us. We have an alliance with Israel, which is perfectly capable of destroying Iran. We could destroy all their hospitals and universities and electricity plants, and we did their bridges and what have you. And in fact, I think the president is right in the sense when he says that we already won. I think we did already win. The IRGC is really, they're in serious trouble. But they're willing to die, and we're not. We're not ready to go all out, and they are. So who knows what the end result of that is. And anybody, I was never in the military, but obviously we have all these ships and all these people, Marines on vessels that they only use to transport them to get on the land, and now they've been sitting in the sea for how many weeks? That can't be a very good situation for our military. Think of the number. And now I think there are 4 now carrier battle groups over there. We only have 9. So, what's happening to Taiwan. So just carrying that analogy about the decapitating the regime, and it didn't lead to a change in the regime. So now we're doing exactly what we set out not to do, which is dealing with the remnants of the regime, right? So we won the war, but we didn't get what we expected to get when the leadership was decapitated. We got much more aggressive leaders of the IRGC. Now, the IRGC is the equivalent of a national guard. It's not a national army. Its sole purpose is to protect the revolution. There's a national army. There is a whole national army in Iran that has not stepped up at all. They've remained completely in their barracks throughout all of this situation, except, of course, we did destroy the Navy. That was part of the regular armed forces. That wasn't IRGC. IRGC has its own Navy. So the question is, can we now switch? And it looks like we are switching, right? Without saying it, we're switching to negotiating with the next regime, which is the same regime, it's just different people. And one aspect of the IRGC is the influence that the Iran-Iraq War had on Iran. So in 1981, Iraq attacked Iran. And guess who was Iraq's major ally? Reagan. USA. Because we were still complex. I think we're still complex by the hostage situation, but we supported Saddam Hussein because we thought he would, defeat the Iranians. Well, he did, but 1 million Iranians died in that war. And most of the people that fought in that war are the ones that are in charge of the IRGC now. So think of their mentality in terms of compromise, in terms of going forward with the situation. I just don't know how we assess that. But it's true that we didn't we didn't correctly assess the situation. That's one of the questions before we decapitated the regime on February 28th. Is there any possibility we can have an end to the conflict? I don't know. I have no way. We have no way of judging that. Now, a phenomenon that I never heard of before is the rising of a situation of people gambling against decisions by President Trump. Have you heard about this? Holy moly. Well, I guess that's about as good as you can do in terms of wondering what's going to happen. But this is actually happening. will Iran ever accept a ceasefire agreement? I don't think it matters, if you want to know the truth. Whatever capabilities they have left, and don't forget, the Israelis and the Americans have carried out, what are they saying? 15,000 strikes against targets in Iran. That's incredible. So what's left? Maybe they have some hidden missiles down at the Strait, but they certainly don't have any capability. So would they accept a ceasefire? Well, there's already a ceasefire just because because they're not firing at us. But we still have all those military assets over there that we have to do something about. So escorts, yeah. Now, we've already been through the escort business. In 1986, the Kuwaitis, this was during the Iran-Iraq War, the Iranians were attacking Kuwaiti vessels. The Iranians were attacking Kuwaiti vessels. The Kuwaitis asked the United States of America to reflag their petroleum export vessels and protect them down the Persian Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz. And I won't tell you the whole story, but I was involved in the decision to say yes to that. And we actually escorted for a year. We escorted their vessels. Are we running up against time?
We were just, I know Robin has to leave, and I'm not sure if anybody else has anything, so.
Oh, yeah, sure. Don't.
Rush out, please. First of all, how about a great big hand of applause? Thank you. You know, John, I'd love to even have a program with just your life and your experiences. I think that would be fascinating.
I am writing a book.
Oh, very good. Okay. So, please stay around if you
Yeah,
have
I don't.
questions, John,
I have nothing in front of me, so.
nowhere to go. Stay as long as you want. Okay. But again, thank you so much. I also want to thank Robin Snyder. For
Yes,
always
Robin, thank you very
coming
much.
and-
Wow,
And recording and setting up.
this is A-level stuff,
And
really.
then he gets the slides and puts them on, and yeah, he does a lot of behind the scenes work too. Thank you all for coming. Next week we have Nancy Landis from fleece to fabric to fleece to fabric. I hope I'm saying it right. She may even bring a sheep. So, and maybe fascinating. We have, and then Dr. Michelle Lee Cosmore. She's also a board member, and I don't know if you know, John is on our board of directors. I don't think I mentioned that, but Dr. Cosmore is going to do, Frank Lloyd Wright designs in Pennsylvania, the architecture, and then it just continues on. With Dr. Leroy Hopkins, a local historian, Millersville University. He's going to do Lancastrians, I hope I'm saying that right, in the Age of Revolution, from bondage to community. So that should be a fascinating
that should be
program
interesting.
as well. And it continues after that. I did want to point out one thing. The gentleman who's coming from Gettysburg, Ross Hedrick, he's going to do Thaddeus Stevens. He's doing it at 1:30 as well as 6:30 at night. So if you want to come out at night and party with Thaddeus Stevens, he's going to be dressing up. So. Thank you, John, and please hang around. And
Yeah, so the last question, which I thought was very apt, is there any way out? Thank you for asking that question. I don't know. I'm totally floored by the fact that we don't seem to have any kind of way forward. We should be out of it, right? Iran should have collapsed. The IRGC should have collapsed. But they're willing to go another step, which is to die for their to die for their beliefs, I guess. I don't know exactly. There's no regime left to protect, and yet you got 160,000 people that are armed to the teeth. So can we kill every one of them? See, somehow this keeps coming up with regard to Iran. You know, I mean, we tried to tell the Shah shoot them all in 1979. He couldn't do it. When they shot them all in January, we said, hey, help is on the way. Well, that didn't work either. So if anybody comes up with a big idea, please.
Bet on it.
Well, the White House site, I'm sure, has a place for suggestions. So. Anyway.